In this room? All right, I'll move this chair. Good. That's how I know you. I mean, everybody's if not, oh yeah. Yeah.
1 year ago. How things
But now we do events throughout the year. The last festival that I told me, not enough funding. That's what they so, and then we're doing all year now. So much really and maybe about some things about trying to get some money to do a thing. And I think we just need to So much faster.
I'm the same way.
Right. And then I like try and I never have to do
Get any interviews? What's going on?
What
I've been making an article program.
Relaxing voice. Thank you all for coming again today, early on Sunday morning. It's great to see so many people here.
We're going to get started. You hear a relaxing voice in the background, soothing you back into the space. If you want to join us, please take your seats and enjoy the flight called Vibe.
As you are taking your seats, we would like to point out to you that we have adjusted the flow of traffic in the space. So we would encourage you all to enter through the door at the end of the corridor, that larger door right there. This is to help prevent noise from coming in from the hallway out there. We would also like to begin today by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of these lands and waters on which we gather here today. Tiohtià:ke is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today it's home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future, and our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. The other announcement I just remembered is that today lunch will be served in the LB building, which is where the fourth space is located. So that's to kind of provide another opportunity to look at the works that are being shown in the Vibrations exhibition in the fourth space. So from 1 to 2 p.m. we have our scheduled lunch break, and again we'll help guide people over there so that we all find the way, and there'll be lunch, and yeah, we'll see the show again.
Art and lunch. This is your co-captain speaking. Just a few things. So today we've been playing and experimenting with a little bit with the interpretation and interpreters. I also just wanted to say a big thank you to the interpreters, French, English, audiovisual catching, and the amazing ASL and LSQ interpreters. They're a huge reason why this conference, this symposium, has been what it is. They have given us amazing feedback. So if we could just kind of give like a little, just love, because this sincerely, the reason why it's been flowing so amazingly is because of these great human beings. So thank you so much for making this process meaningful for all of us. Thank you. So on that note, we're gonna play with the moderators today. What we kindly ask is in between each presenter, if there's audio-visual material, just give like a minute. We're gonna use some slowness today, which I really love. So just give a minute to allow the audio-visual interpreter Kat to describe. And maybe this is a practice we can put forward in other spaces if we find it's effective. The other thing too that and of course my supervisor just walked in, Lauren Roth, something that was really important yesterday that we didn't acknowledge. Happy Hanukkah to everyone here that is giving their time to us. Okay, well, thank you still very much for being with us. We really appreciate it, and we just hope that this is a good news. We just wanted to say happy early Hanukkah. And we'll put a sign on that door, but that's it. I think that's it. Oh, and yes. So, and photos, we have Julia and Magda, our photographers. So if you do not want your photo taken, or for whatever reason, just put a little circle on, a big circle, a big circle on your name tag on the left-hand corner and the right-hand corner. There will be no flash, but they're aware that they don't want to intervene too much, so just let them know from time to time if it's a little much, but they've been pretty amazing. Let's give it up for our photographers too. They've been grabbing some amazing shots, and have been super kind, so thank you, Magda and Julia. Finally, I really am so excited to introduce Carla Rice. Carla Rice is one of the principal researcher on a project called Bodies in Translation, with of course Eliza Chandler. I just really would love, let's give it up for them. They came in from Toronto. These are two people that are really important, play an important role on mobilizing perceptions and understandings of deaf and disability arts in Canada. So we really appreciate you being here. Eliza is a professor in the Department of Disability Studies at Ryerson University. And both of them have played an integral part in even informing us and how we should be envisioning this entire symposium. So Carla today will be chairing this panel and introducing these amazing people on the left, but I'll let her do that. So thank you so much to Eliza and Carla for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I just want to say a few things about this conference and how it's been organized before we open up the panel, if that's okay. As people who are embedded in academia know, the academic world is a fiercely competitive one, especially in the wake of the neoliberalization of the academy. And I think that Ash and Sam and Kim and others who have been involved in this conference have really demonstrated what is possible when we come together and work together to collaboratively to push against neoliberal logics and neoliberal values. And so I really just want to thank them for what they have accomplished here, for the welcoming space that they've created. And you know, as we say in disability arts and in critical disability studies, we want to create spaces where disability is not only tolerated, but where disability is welcomed in. And I feel that they have accomplished that in this space. So I wonder if everybody could give them a little round of applause.
We didn't realize you were talking about us just now, so we were both just sort of Are they talking about me right now?
Yes.
She said some really nice things about us. Thank you, Carla.
All good things, all good things. So I feel so lucky and so privileged and honored to introduce this panel this morning that is being convened by Alison Kafer, who, as folks know, is a well-known, well-respected disability and feminist studies academic, author, activist, along with two artists whose work I had a chance to interact with over the last few days, Salima Punjani and Alexis Bulman. And Alison, as many folks know, is a professor in Feminist Studies at Southwestern University, and she's the author of the book Feminist Queer. And I was thinking this morning about what makes this book such an amazing piece of work. And for me, I sort of gave myself two answers to that question that I posed of myself as I was lying in bed thinking about this panel. The first is that, sort of she puts forth some startlingly original argument and ideas around time and disability, and the ideas that have a potential for a profound transformational change within the classroom and beyond the classroom. And I've witnessed that myself, teaching a graduate course called Rethinking the Human. The people who come to that space, sometimes with quite conventional ideas about aging and about disability, find themselves transformed and their perspectives transformed by the arguments that she makes in the book. And the second reason that I think the book is so compelling and has had such an impact is that it's written in a clear and direct and engaging kind of storytelling style that doesn't compromise theory, but I think reaches sort of perhaps a broader audience than many academic texts do because of the exclusivity of our language. So Alison's going to convene this session, and Salima Punjani is going to spend some time talking about her work. Salima is a social artist based in Montreal, Quebec. I had an opportunity to talk with her yesterday, and she told me that she has a history of working for the CBC as a journalist. And she, for those of you who don't know, has a beautiful piece of work over in Fourth Space. And so I really encourage people to engage with the work. It's called Progression. And I think she'll be speaking a little bit about that work this morning. Awesome. And the third panelist is Alexis Bulman. And Alexis is an artist who is from Prince Edward Island, out east. And she has a studio-based practice here in Montreal. And her work is, I think your work is in the next room, yeah, across the hall. And Alexis works around issues of bodily difference and how bodily difference in her case, scoliosis, shows up in her work. So I'm now going to turn the floor over to the panelists for, I hope, a moving and engaging panel. So thank you.
Is this? Hi, my name is Alison. I think convene is just a really fancy word for my getting to sit up here and learn from these amazing artists, from all of you. Before I say anything else, I mean, actually mostly what I want to say is just to express deep gratitude that I get to be here. I have spent the last couple of years writing about the work of artist Sandy Lee. I don't know if Sandy is here, over there. And I am just so grateful to the work that artists do in terms of helping me think about the world differently and more justly, I hope. And this weekend has just confirmed that. I am so, I don't know, gobsmacked by all of you. And so I want to thank Ash and Sam for making this space and for inviting me, but I also want to thank all of you for making this space together. I think one of the great insights of disability activism is that accessibility is something that we do together, and it happens in real time with real people and entities and spaces. And so thanks to all of you for making this a space where this kind of work can happen. So thanks. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the artists, because I want to make sure that we get lots of space and time to learn from them. So Alexis, are you going first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this on?
I'm not sure if this is on. Can you hear me? You can? Okay. So maybe I'll give you a little explanation first into what scoliosis is. I don't usually do this because I always just assume that everybody knows, but that's entirely probably not the case. Scoliosis is defined as an abnormal curvature of the spine that occurs during the pubescent growth period. When I was, I kind of forget now, I think when I was 14, I was diagnosed with scoliosis. And this is sort of the driving thing that inspires the artwork that I'm producing today. My case with scoliosis was pretty unique. A lot of girls, when they're diagnosed with scoliosis, for them it's something that is diagnosed a little late for it to be treated with correctional surgery. But in my case, my parents were looking for scoliosis in myself and in all three of my siblings from the moment we started entering puberty. And the reason my parents started looking for it is because I am the third generation of women in my family to have scoliosis, and I'm the second to receive a medical correctional surgery for it. So it was kind of neat. It was a little bit. It was a family affair. On Sunday mornings, my siblings and I would line up on the side of my parents' bed, and my parents would do the forward bend test. Forward bend test is when you bend down with your legs straight, and you bend over and touch your toes so that your back is sort of a flat plane. And then my parents would run their fingers down the spine to feel for curvature. And we would do this all the time, not even really, sort of being too young to even really know what scoliosis truly meant. And then one day my parents found it in me. And so we started the process of going to doctors and then eventually specialists. And I was fitted for a back brace that I never got to wear because a summer after being fitted for this back brace, I went through an unexpected growth spurt, and I surpassed that time frame where it was predicted that a brace would be enough to treat my scoliosis, and I curved dramatically, which meant I took a growth spout. And so I went from wearing a back brace to, like, I skipped that and went right to needing correctional surgery. And the correctional surgery consisted of 9 days at the IWK hospital in Nova Scotia, where a metal rod and a series of pins were installed in my spine to correct my my scoliosis. And I use air quotes because I still have scoliosis that is severe enough that if a teen were diagnosed with it today, they would be shipped with a back brace. So it is sort of the most improved that it could be made in my scenario. But then some of the complexities that came off of that were the hospital I was in was a learning hospital, so it was never just my parents, me, and the doctor. It was also a team of learning interns, and I always sort of felt like I was under a microscope, and I was sort of being talked about rather than talked to with words that I didn't understand. And then sort of the juxtaposition of that was, in my own family, I was a superstar because I had the best scoliosis of all of us, of my mom, my aunt, both my grandmothers. And anytime I went to a family reunion, all of my aunts would make me bend over and touch my toes, and they would all take turns feeling my spine. So it was like, in my household, it was this like super cool thing, and I felt like I was part of the group, and it really was a sense of belonging, and a real sense of my identity that I loved. But then, and so there was the hospital version of scoliosis and my home version. And then the third version was how I was interpreted at the school that I went to, and that was quite negative. And so I have all these different interpretations of who I am and what I look like through the eyes of all these different groups. And so that is sort of the driving force that inspires the artwork that I make. I need a drink of water. So now I think I'll fast forward a little bit. And I think I'll talk to you a little bit maybe about oh yeah, so I guess I'll talk a little bit about the piece that I have across the hallway. The piece across the hallway is called Upstack to Downstack, and it's sort of about reaching emotionally and physically for a comfortable space where I can experience a physical disability and a physical deformity of the spine in a body that that when you meet me no longer views as that. My disability is now relatively invisible, and a lot of the sort of physical attributes of having scoliosis now are not necessarily visible to you when you meet me, but it doesn't mean that when you meet me I am not currently in physical pain or experiencing something that you can't see on the surface. And so the artwork that you see across the hallway, it comes from this sort of now funny story that happened in high school when I was in gym class. It was post-op, and I could no longer participate in gym class for a number of months. I think it was actually 4 semesters, I can't really remember right now. So instead of finding a sport or an activity that was accessible to the group, the entire student class, my teacher put me in her gym office, and it had this transparent window that looked into the gymnasium. So while I was sitting alone in her office, I could see through this window at my entire class playing dodgeball together. And she, and it wasn't because she was sort of misinformed, she really tried to accommodate what I needed physically. And so she came up and she did research, and she came up with the idea that I would do competitive cup stacking, because it is famously one of the most inclusive and accessible sports. But of course exactly. She completely separated me, and there was an actual window where I could see everyone else doing things together. And it was sort of made even, at the court at the time, this was heartbreaking, but now I can laugh at it. It was made even more ridiculous by the fact that I wasn't given an instructional video. I was given sort of a documentary YouTube style video, and it was on VHS that she rolled in, and she pressed play to it, but there was no remote, and it wasn't an instructional video of the sport. It was like a tournament footage, so I could see these kids who were the best in the world competing against each other in these record times. You know, the blink of an eye, they had things stacked, and there was no way. So I had to watch the video all the way through, and it was about maybe 11 or 12 minutes long. I had to watch it all the way through and sort of take notes on what they were doing and practice with my own cups. And then wait for my teacher to come back in so she could restart the video for me. And this was every gym class. And then the next level too was that they weren't the proper cup stacking official sport cups. Like you see in the video, the cups in the video they're aerodynamic in the way that they're shaped, and they have 3 holes, so there's no sort of friction of air between the cups. But I started with styrofoam cups, which have so much friction. And then after that, I said they kind of weren't working, and I kept trying, and so she replaced those with those red Dixie drinking cups, which are like, you can break them with your fingertips. And so it was sort of this really funny and sort of heartbreaking experience of someone trying to accommodate somebody who just needed a different set of parameters to work within, and her sort of not having the ability to meet what I needed. And so the project Across the Hallway it kind of relates that experience to what it was like to receive medical treatment in that learning hospital, where I felt like people were looking at me and talking at me, and I never really knew what was going on. And so a lot of the performative projects that I do sort of try to marry those personal experiences that I've been through with these sort of absurdly sterile, lab rat-esque hospital experiences that I've had. And so that's kind of what you're seeing Across the Hallway in that project. And then I think maybe, have I talked enough, or should I talk about another project, or come back to me? I have no idea how fast I'm talking.
That was only 10 minutes. Yeah.
Go a little bit more. Okay, so I'll switch from, so that's sort of where my performative art pieces are coming from. And then there's another type of art making that I've been doing, and it's more physical. And it's installation pieces and temporary sculptures. And so a lot of these temporary sculptures are based around, well, they kind of come from that same timeline of when I was diagnosed with scoliosis, and I was trying to figure out what it meant for me. And I grew up near a shore, Linklater Shore in PEI. And it was when I was like 14 years old, I just found out I had scoliosis, and I had really no idea what it meant. I didn't understand why a curved spine was abnormal and a straight spine wasn't normal. I had no idea what that meant or why. And so I went on this walk to the shore, which I did all the time. And I just remember looking around, and all of the trees around me were curved. And the shoreline was curved, and the way the waves came in, everything curved naturally, just like my spine. And so I couldn't understand why my spine was incorrect. And so a lot of the sculptures I make they take human-made things and objects and materials, and they put them back in nature to be surrounded in that environment that I felt more related to. So this summer I started working on a project called Bound Between Seasons, and it was inspired by this time of year, actually. It's kind of nice right now. I just finished exhibiting this project, and it's the time of year right now where I'm seeing this project naturally in the city all around me. It's inspired by the tarped forms that you see in sort of early winter. So if people have a fishing boat or a car, they might put a tarp over it for the winter to protect it from snow and from the incoming winter climate. And so all across Atlantic Canada or North America, in this cold climate, you see these tarped forms appearing in private yards everywhere. If you go home today and look in your backyard, you will see these tarped forms. I can see through you from my kitchen window. And so I just went around to different art festivals. I did 3 art festivals and 1 residency this fall, where I would just talk with the community that I was in and ask if people would bring me their objects, their boats, their hay bales, whatever. And I covered them in tarps. It was very, very simple. But the reason I did this was because they're sort of inspired by "This is not a pipe" painting. The idea that a car underneath a tarp is still a car. And I wanted you to see these things that occur every day that are so easily overlooked. And I wanted you to start identifying with them as being a metaphor for invisible disability. That these, you know, because if I promote this project enough and I built enough of these sculptures, maybe people would start to see this thing that they've often overlooked and start allowing it to be like a beacon of a reminder that even if you... The idea of these tarps is that the, let's see, I've lost my train of thought. Well, oh no, I completely lost my train of thought.
Said something about a beacon, and then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
like, the lines are going up.
And a metaphor for invisible disability.
Right. Great. Oh yeah, and it's yeah, I've lost my train of thought, but it's meant to also tie together the tension between the external and internal realities of physical disability and invisible disability, and this idea that if a car is covered in a tarp, it could be a car underneath the tarp, but it could also be something that is much more internally complex and sophisticated and difficult to explain than just a car under a tarp. And so I've been doing this project, and I think I've finished 21 of these things. And the really neat part is that people had been, because it is that time of year, people had been sending me photos of the things that they've been covering in tarps. And I really like that, because I'm not claiming to own this project. It's based on something that people have already been doing for a long time. I think if it's okay, I think I'll show you some images of the ones that I completed this summer. Because the next phase of the project is that I'm going to have taken dozens of photos of each sculpture from different angles and distances and different light. And the next part is that I want to remove the background, remove the environmental context of these forms, and let the forms sit as drawn shapes and images on paper. And that's what the part of the project I'll be working on this winter. But I'll show you those now. So I have a bit more creativity with how that sculpture will look in the end, because the object underneath has more give, it has fewer hard surfaces. But I've never actually created the shape underneath. Okay, so I'm gonna do a look here. Let me just see my shadow. So this is an example of
Use a mic. Use a mic.
Is it on? Yeah. Okay, so in the fall I did a residency. It was 2 weeks long with Connection Arc in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And while I was there, I got to work with the Victoria Health Centre. There's a park right next door. So these were some picnic tables and I think a large tree that I wrapped in tarps. And it was really great. I got to go in and visit the people in the Victoria Health Clinic and work sort of in synchronicity with them to make these. So this is just one example. I'm not totally sure. Here we go. This one, obviously, maybe it's not even important that I tell you what the objects are, because the idea is sort of that you decide for yourself, I guess. I'm going to move this cursor. I exhibited at Art in the Open, the outdoor art festival in PEI this summer, but that's where my parents live, so it doubled as a great excuse to go home. And so while I was there, I used my parents' raspberry farm to just make a bunch of these sculptures and get used to the tarps and how to fold and tie knots and wrap rope. So this is one of the ones I did on my parents' farm, just for the sake of it. My parents ended up with a lot of these tarps to use on their farm. These are 3 of the Bound Between Seasons sculptures I did for Third Shift Festival in New Brunswick. New Brunswick. These were actually the first 3, so you're seeing less rope and just more drapery. I'm kind of getting the hang of it. This is sort of an example of the next phase of the drawing process. Like I said, the next thing I'll be doing is taking the forms, isolating them from their backgrounds, and then I think they will exist independently on large sheets of paper. I think the drawing process will really be fun with these. But my hope is that they kind of become, I don't know, more ambiguous and sort of, you'll have to work harder to figure out why these shapes seem familiar. And a car underneath a tarp is no longer in an art festival. It's now going to be on a wall, on a piece of paper for you to look at with no background. So I like the idea of I'm giving you kind of less and less to work with to identify the object, but at the same time, you're confronted with nothing else but the object. So I don't know. I don't totally know what the goal of that part of the project is, but I'm working on that still. We'll see. I think that's all of my images. I don't have any. Oh, yeah. So this is in the drawing process. It's an example of how I also might leave shadows in to give you a greater sense of the environment that's been erased. Getting used to tying knots. And I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, maybe I'll hand the mic over to you, and at the end, thank you. At the end, if we can talk about these projects more as they relate to your projects. But thank you so much. I'm actually gonna head up there.
Well, Salima's setting up, maybe people have questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm Mary Bunch.
Microphone, please.
Microphone?
Oh, sorry. Hi, thanks so much for your talk. I loved the talk and the work. It was really fantastic. And of course, I have a lot of experience covering things with tarps, as many people probably do in the Canadian and US context.
And you're cold.
And one of the things that because I often cover things with tarps and then leave them all winter, and sometimes year after year, we have tarp sheds. We pile junk in and then cover with tarp. We call it the tarp shed. And the tarps, of course, fray and pieces of what's underneath start to become exposed. And I was just wondering if there's a dimension of this work that is looking at the kind of temporality of those tarps and the wear and the way what is hidden becomes revealed as it becomes weathered and how it kind of changes in time.
Absolutely. And the great thing about the residency I did with Connection Art is that those sculptures are the only ones I've done out of the 21 that will stay installed for the duration of the winter. The rest of them, because they are part of art festivals, they had to come down. And so the great thing about the Connection ones is that they'll be sending me pictures of what they look like in the winter. The wind might tear them off a little bit. It'll change the sculpture. The way the snow weighs down on these tarp-covered trees. There are a lot of environmental changes that will happen to the sculptures. And then of course the landscape that will fill up around them as well. So absolutely I'm curious about how these sculptures change over time, but also I relate these to the human form, but in sort of a non-literal way. In the past, I've done public speaking about being an artist with scoliosis and what that means to me. And I was disappointed once when after the panel, someone came up to me and they said that it's hard to believe for them that I ever had scoliosis because I looked great. And I thought oh, okay, old man things. It kind of, that's why I kind of choose these non-literal forms to stand into the human body, because an invisible disability and disabilities in any context are never just simple. It's never easily defined. And so I choose these TARP forms to be objects, or to be standing through human form, because I like that they sort of sit upright, plumply on a horizon as if to be alive, or they kind of hibernate as if to be asleep for the winter. And they take on these typical variety of shapes and forms, and everyone is so different. But also, there's a relationship to the TARP itself as textiles that I relate to my own experience with textiles. Taking comfort in blankets on days when I'm really sore, or wearing before I had my correctional surgery, wearing loose fitting clothing because I wasn't sure how I should dress myself and how I should look to other people. And so taking comfort in shelter and camouflage and textiles, just like we do with tarps over objects. So there is a relation there. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good morning. I just wanted to say thanks for being here on this motivating to get out of bed Sunday morning. Today I'm presenting a project called Progression that's on display downstairs. It was first exhibited at Tangled Arts in Toronto through an exhibition series called Flourishing, where David Bobier was a co-curator. And so I feel really lucky to have my mentor here too. It's very comforting. I guess the background of the project is that I kind of dreamt of being a reporter since I was 10. Everything I did was to somehow be telling stories and be on TV, and I did it. I was lucky enough to win the Joan Donaldson Fellowship through CBC, which is kind of a big deal. I don't mean that in an egotistical way, but it kind of is. But the thing is that that summer of doing that fellowship, I relapsed. I have multiple sclerosis, and I tried to hide it. I tried so hard. I'm like, no, I'm strong. I can fight through it. But it's like when you win this fellowship, people expect more than what they expect of their employees, because you're like proving your worth, and it's difficult to prove your worth when you have MS and you're relapsing, because it's hard to function, get out of bed, and think in a 24-hour news cycle is something that's really, really challenging. So, so here I am, just to describe the picture. There's me, an Indian lady in a colorful scarf and a black blazer holding a microphone in front of the Atlantic Ocean that smells like salt with cold icebergs in the background. And I probably look really happy. And so the thing is that I had to make a decision after that fellowship to not let myself do that kind of work, because it was making me sick. And it became this moment of embracing my vulnerability and my creativity. My whole life I told myself I'd be a reporter, and when I finally got there I had to let it go, which was really tough. And it kind of just also made me realize that I couldn't hide it anymore. I couldn't hide my diagnosis, I couldn't hide my creativity. And so, as a response to processing all of that, I decided to create a project called Progression. At the time I didn't know that's what its name was, but that's what it is now. And so the whole point was to blend science and art to reclaim narratives through photography. And so the thing is that I feel like a lot of the time, even when I was talking about MS at the beginning, I would gloss over it. I was like, oh, but you know I'm okay, and it's fine, and I'll be positive. But I wanted to create an opportunity to tell stories outside of a medical context to doctors and nurses that are looking for symptoms, looking for what's wrong with you. And also to kind of not gloss over the scientific reality of living with with multiple sclerosis. So there's a picture on the screen, and it is a woman named Nico wearing a skirt, and she's photographed from the bottom up in a very powerful position because she wanted to be shown in a strong position, really focusing on her strengths. She is surrounded or framed by her MRI scan, looking at her neck and her brain. So what I asked people through support groups and also kind of vulnerably putting it up on Facebook, it was actually the first time I ever went public, and I put out this post saying like, hey, like this is what I've been living with and I want to process it creatively. If you or someone you know has MS, could you let them know that I'm looking for participants for a project, mixing their brain scans with their portraits. And oddly enough, considering MS has a really high rate in Canada, there's actually a wait list of people that want to participate. Because there's a lot of us. There's one in every, 360-ish people that have it. And so instead of like kind of just taking pictures of people, I really wanted participants to play an active role in choosing how they'd like to be seen. So I listened. I listened to people's stories, and we co-developed portraits together. So here's Nico again. We took two. So Nico is the woman that was previously pictured. She's pictured now in a seated position on a blanket, surrounded by alternative medicine bottles in Vancouver, on Vancouver Island in Victoria, where it's a beautiful summer day with flowers blooming in the background and also close to the ocean. So you can maybe smell the salt in the picture as well. And she wanted to talk about how difficult it is when you're trying to pursue an alternative treatment for MS when there's like drugs being basically like injected into your arm, and like it's really intense. Like I remember the first time, I was always reluctant to try medicine because I really believe in the medicine of my ancestors in Ayurveda. But I finally gave in, and I remember before I even decided to take Copaxone, which is the first treatment that they give you, a nurse had called me from the drug company asking me to set up a meeting. And I actually, I'm generally pretty calm, but I told her never to call me again. Because I was disgusted at the fact that this pharmaceutical company had my information without me even filling the prescription. Yeah. And this is a picture of Leanne, and she's seen surrounded by her brain, where you could see her eyeballs, and she's in the kind of like, I don't know the proper term in neuroscience, but the bottom quadrant of her brain. It's a black and white photo, and she's in St. Henry in Montreal along the canal running backwards. And so it's important to her to stay active, but sometimes she feels like she's running backwards even though she's trying to move forward. So this is kind of what she wanted to share in her portrait. The reason I wanted to tell you some of these stories is that I only could show 3 of the stories downstairs, and I hope one day I'll be able to have a more comprehensive exhibition, but for now, I wanted to share these with you. So here's Amanda. Again, she's surrounded by her brain, MRI scan, and she's holding up some figure skates. Well, not figure skates, they're actually sports skates because we couldn't find figure skates. But we're at an ice rink, and so she's in the background, and she's holding them up and for her, like, I didn't want to force anyone to be positive or anything. I didn't really want to impose any narratives at all on people. So she's holding up these skates because she used to be a figure skater and a dancer, and now, as she describes it, she walks like a penguin and can't do that anymore. And so for her, she wanted to be shown kind of hanging up her skates. Next up is Amanda, whose teeth are surrounding her head like a tiara, and she's also pictured in her brain, and she is opening up a polka dot gift box. When we were talking, there's something I want to add is that we kind of found a lot of humor in being really dark and morbid. And so we were talking, and she's like, it's so unpredictable, and I really struggle with that. She's also a journalist, and I was like, it's kind of like opening up a gift box, isn't it? Like, you never really know what's inside, and I was like, oh man, that's really dark. And she's like, I love it. Let's photograph that. And so Sarah's pictured here looking into a gift box where she doesn't know what's inside. Here's Patricia. She's pictured where her brain was conveniently symmetrical. And so we used it as a way to kind of set up a clock. Or the shot of her brain. There's just so many pictures in the MRI scan, it's difficult to choose. And so her hands are, I guess at 1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock and 11 o'clock on a clock. She's holding sparklers. You can't really see them on fire, but they're there. And there's different things surrounding her in her portrait that have to do with the things that she hopes to do in a day. So at the top you see a pillow and a towel, symbolizing sleep. Then you see a frying pan to cook. And then there's a towel. I guess the top might just have a blanket. But so then there's a towel with some shampoo. There's her computer. There's some gym stuff, some dancing stuff, some wine, some textbooks. Some cleaning materials and a balloon for partying too, because she always used to consider herself the life of the party, and now she's like, I'm just tired, I can't really do that anymore. And so it's kind of like this way, and she describes it for herself downstairs, so I feel like that might be worth listening to, and if you can't, then feel free to email me and I'll send you an MP3. And so yeah, so that's kind of how she's pictured, of trying to balance all these things that she needs to do in a day or that she'd like to do in a day, but not really knowing where to put her arms or how to balance all of this. And this is Stefan, and he is a black man wearing glasses, pictured in Montreal outside of a rehabilitation center, again, framed by his brain. He's holding an iPad that he is filming the outside of the rehabilitation center with, because something that he realized is that in his process of healing, he got to meet some really awesome people, like really incredible people, and he wanted to start documenting their stories. And so he's kind of using his process of treatment and of healing, which is often really difficult and challenging mentally and physically, to kind of find a silver lining in a way. And what I love about this is that my actual inspiration for the project came from Jo Spence's Cancer Shock, where she was documenting people's experiences living with cancer through photography. And I loved how it kind of changed this process of treatment from being this process of being sick to the things that are trying to support our healing. Here's Manon. That's a little darker than I anticipated it would be, but I'll describe it for you, and it's also downstairs. And so she's pictured in a stripy tank top. Her nose is really prominent, her nose bridge in her brain scan in this one. The clouds in the sky matched up with gray parts of her brain. She's pictured in one arm holding a cane, and in the other a badminton racket. And so she actually has progressive MS, and that's when it kind of stops getting better. And so she wanted to be seen with the badminton racket and a cane, because it reminded her of a story of when she was playing badminton with a friend and just had to sit down. And she was really sad because she loves badminton and she loves this friend, and that's what they do. And then he sat down across from her and started passing the birdie to her, and sat down and they played badminton sitting down. And it meant a lot to her, because in the process of, of all of this, of you know, her disease progressing and everything. She felt like she was losing connections with friends, and people didn't know how to be around her anymore. And so this friend taking that moment to sit down and meet her on her level, it was really something that meant a lot to her, but you can hear her talk about it. So, and there's me. I'm a little naked. Reason being that, okay, so there's me, and I have my arms above my head and kind of like a warrior stance. And the whole point of this portrait was to show the embracing of vulnerability. And actually through Flourishing, the series at Tangled, we had a chance to go on this awesome retreat with like artists from across Canada who are just like outstanding human beings. Like, thank you, Tangled, for just putting together so many marvelous people. And Laura, who's a playwright who recently just showed Mad Ones, the play that she created through the Flourishing series in Toronto. She was telling me about this goddess who is actually always pictured naked but covered in gold, and she actually has tons of weapons, including like songs that she sings herself to calm her when she's scared. But even though the gold is kind of symbolic of how her embracing of her vulnerability of being naked is actually her biggest strength, her biggest force. And I never really knew how to take my own portrait. I wasn't even going to put myself in this. But when she told me about this goddess, I was like, that's exactly what I want to do. And so, yeah, there's my portrait. So multi-sense, how am I doing for time? I feel like I've been rambling.
So it's about 11:02 now, so it's for maybe about 17, 18 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, so I just want to say that the first kind of portrait development was funded through the Canada Council's Cultivate grant. But I didn't feel like that was enough. I didn't want to exhibit this unless it was multisensory. Because when I was interviewing people, I had a chance to speak to someone who's blind, and I asked him, how would you like to be seen? And he kind of gave me shit. He was like, well, I don't really see, so I don't know how to answer your question. And it kind of like took me aback, and I was like, well, I don't want to exhibit this unless people who, you know, are experiencing symptoms of MS that affect vision and all of this can participate somehow and experience it somehow. And so then Tangled selected me as one of the Flourishing artists, and I could make it multisensory. So downstairs you can see that the two sides of the box, one is carved on wood through a laser engraving process, and I'll get back to the wood briefly after, and then I recorded brainwaves of the participants as I was interviewing them about how they'd like to be seen. And so those have been transformed into vibrotactile elements. So the box and the pillows and the neck pillows, they all vibrate with the brainwaves. And on the last box, you can actually wear the Muse headset across your forehead. I'll just give you a little instruction manual now. And hold the pillow, and you'll actually feel your own response to my own story. The reason I chose wood is that kind of similar to you, I kind of am really attracted to trees and how they're strong on the outside, but you don't really know what's happening inside. And I felt like an engraving on the wood was kind of symbolic of like invisible disability as well, and how you don't really know what's happening always. And so I thought that process of engraving and carving into something to make what's invisible visible is quite symbolic, and also to make it tactile. So here's the opening at Tangled. That was really exciting to be part of, partially, and I'll end on this, because this is the first year I've had the wonderful experience of being in barrier-free spaces. Being at Tangled, there's this wonderful gallery manager named Sean Lee, who I wish could be here. He's getting whistles, we'll have to tell him Eliza. Because I was super tired. Like, installing this thing was the first time I did like 90% of this stuff. Like, I've never engraved on wood or like translated brainwaves into sound or like any of this stuff. Like, ask me about this a year ago, I would not know how to answer you. And I was really tired, and Tangled had invested so much in bringing me there and letting me come back for a 24-hour trip to Montreal to go to school for a day, and like all of this stuff. And I was just tired. I'm like, Sean, I really need a nap. And he brought me a blanket and a cushion. He's like, how can I make you more comfortable? And the thing that I think that symbolizes is like, it wasn't like in the past, like with competitive things that I've been a part of. It was like, it wasn't like you're not productive so you're no good, or you're worthless because you're not productive. It was like, I want to create the conditions to support you to create meaningful work. And that really stuck with me, and I feel really lucky that now at the Museum of Fine Arts I have a supervisor that's doing the same. I don't really know how I'm going to function in another way anymore, but I feel like that's been a really beautiful part of the learning process. So just having this experience of belonging and connection to all of you as well. And on that note, I just want to say thank you.
It's okay, can we just give one moment, just give a moment for the audience.
So we're going to take a moment for the audio description and catch up, and also for us just to think and percolate on the amazing things we've heard and seen and encountered.
I'm okay for audio description. Thank you.
Thank you both for those amazing presentations. I'm just blown away. I appreciate so much both of your artworks are doing, like the goals are the same, but coming about it in such different methods. And what I picked up on most with yours, Alexis, is how abstracted the bodies became. And then in Salima's, the bodies are very particularized. Portraits, direct portraits, so you can see the facial features. It's, so I felt, I'm just wondering if you could say what your method of sharing very particular stories versus very abstracted bodies, and yeah, the strengths of those two very different methods.
Hello. I think that, to be quite honest with you, just having a journalistic background too, I think is pretty evident in this. Like I still feel this connection to really honoring people's stories and giving them the front page. I didn't want that to be me or my artist statement or anything. I wanted it to be their stories. And so I think that in my own work, that's kind of something that I prioritize, is like reclaiming narratives and defining yourself. I think that your face should, or your, however you want to visualize yourself, should be there, and I don't want to abstract that as such. I think moving forward, it'll probably be quite different, but for this project, it was that.
And for me, I come to this from a very different perspective. I'm not a journalist. Before I started making artwork about scoliosis, I was making visual art about growing up in Atlantic Canada. And so I was making temporary installations and sculptures before I moved into this sort of topic that was so important to me. So to me, it felt very natural to follow that and to keep making these forms and these installations that felt very abstract in nature. And then the other part of that for me too is that, like I said, I've always felt like the way that I view myself is so different than my family did, or my peers at school or at the hospital. And so if I chose to use the human form literally in my work, I feel like when people look at that, they'll see different things. And so I wanted to make something that we could see together as a form and an environment. And if that is interpreted through different lenses, then so be it. But at least it isn't a body that is being literally how I view myself in this body.
I just wanted to make a note on that abstraction of bodies. Like, I think that the process of kind of like hacking medical data to build empathy and connection is more where that abstraction comes in for me, where it's like not only relating to these things to find literal symptoms and diagnoses and things like that, but as a way that you can kind of cuddle people's brain waves and feel their MRI scans and things like that, as more of a way to kind of like take away that block of connection and things that people that I interviewed and speak with and hang out with often mention that loss of connection when facing MS and a diagnosis like that.
One person here, and then we have a cluster of
Hi, my name is Nadine Changfont, and I'm at Trent University, and thank you so much to you both. My question, I have a question for each of you. For Alexis, the tarping very much resonated, and in my mind also, I think great care can be taken when tarping objects like cars and barbecues and boats. These are objects of value, material value. And then I'm thinking I also cover trees with burlap, so a different material. So associations with class that are often not disability welcoming, for example, come to mind. So I was curious any thoughts you might share that entered into your process. And then for Salima, the portraits that represent, that were co-created and represent so many intersections, interconnections, and intra-connections, rippling outward, are so compelling for me. And a question I have for you is, I really also enjoyed the monochrome representation. So I'm curious about how color entered, did not enter into the final representations.
Yeah, I'll say that I haven't given a lot of thought to the idea of class and these material objects that are being covered, but I do have a very prominent curiosity around the objects that are being covered. For instance, when I look out my kitchen right now, you can see those three things tarped in the roulette, the little alley behind my apartment. You know, there are multiple things in a person's yard, but they choose to cover one of them, and it is with intention and care that they cover it. They've decided that they want to cover a bicycle, and then they've decided to buy a certain tarp of a certain size and a certain color, and drape it in a certain way, and secure it in a certain way with ropes or bungee cords or whatever. And so I think I'm more curious and focused and sort of honed in on the shape of the object and where the object is in the yard and why that person chose to wrap that object and not the ones that are also present there. But I haven't given a lot of thought yet, because I think I thought about this project a lot before I actually got to start it. And then because I was installing these installations and these sculptures at festivals, which are very temporary exhibitions, I wasn't able to give them a lot of thought beyond when they were finally installed. And I think that's sort of one of the main reasons why I'm planning to take this bound between seasons body of work into a drawing process, because I want to sit with each image and look at it and isolate it from that environment, erase the objects that weren't covered in tarps, that were in its background, and figure out what it is about this shape or this object that the person chose to cover instead of the other ones. So I think in the next phase of the project, I'll spend more time on those kind of questions.
MRI data is in black and white, so that wasn't really a choice, but I see where you're coming from. I decided to keep the whole project in black and white because originally I wanted to make it look like you were walking into a doctor's office, like where you had those before digital, those sheets that you put up and you look at it, but I didn't want the portraits to be obvious. I wanted people to actually walk around and then be like, oh wait, there's a person inside, what's their story? So it was kind of, that was more the intention at the beginning. But then the other day when we were installing this exhibition, I was like, David, I just want to add some colorful cushions and blankets and can we just make it cozier? It looks so sterile. I want it to feel like I want a cup of tea and some cookies and people to just listen. So David said that that's maybe not the best idea, and I get why. But I think like that's where the color comes in for me. It's the relationship and the experience of experiencing with other people and having that kind of like human aspect to it and kind of the surroundings that it's in. Like I think the color adds into the experience after, not in.
So we have about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes and a lot of questions, but also Alison, I don't know if you have anything you want to comment on. So I thought one thing we could do is rather than having responses to each of the questions, if everyone would be welcome to this, hearing all the questions, and then we could hear the questions and then continue the conversation after.
Could I borrow a pen and paper from someone in that case?
Sure, yeah. So Alison, did you want to say anything before we move to all the questions?
Yes, I want to say like 1,000 things. So I'll just say thank you, and then open it up. Thank you to the artists and then open up to the teachers.
Hi, okay, a couple questions. So I'm wondering, Alexis, what you may be noting in terms of any differences in response to your artworks from your family members and from other people with scoliosis versus audience who don't have that particular experience with scoliosis. So I'm curious about that. And I wanted to ask Salima if there have been any people connecting to your project with MS who have said, yes, I'm interested to create something with you, but who have been interested in doing something different than using an image of their brain scan, or who have kind of maybe pushed back or wanted to investigate some alternatives of depiction. And I'm just wondering about that.
Hi, excuse me. Thank you so much for the presentations, they're great. So I was sort of like riffing on lineages of these, and it's, so first I was thinking Christo, and I was thinking of daguerreotypes and early, and then like spectral photography that was sort of like of the early 20th century. But then I actually went right to Frida Kahlo. So my daughter's also had back surgery, she has a lot of challenges. And it was her dream to go see the Frida Kahlo show that was recently opened in the Victoria and Albert Museum, which is so interesting because all her medical prosthetics, which she decorated beautifully, are on view, but also all of her clothing that she used to cover everything is also on view. And then there's photographs, like with her, there's kind of medical photographs as well. So I actually just want to propose that she is, oh, thank you so much. This is kind of a pillow and a blanket. Just as a kind of progenitor to this kind of disability artistry that we're looking at, because there isn't much of a legacy like in art history. I hate to go like Christo or daguerreotypes. And so I just want to propose that we think about that, especially because this work was released only very recently. Her Diego has been away for 50 years, so it's actually coming to the Brooklyn Museum in February. I don't know the plans for the show to come to Canada. And the title, Victoria and Albert, was Making Herself Up, which seems very appropriate to, it's like, if you want to think of yourselves as a legacy.
Hi, this is Drea speaking. I wanted to first say thank you again for both of your beautiful works and hearing what you had to say about them. I really appreciated how both of you were coming at it from different ways of resisting normative ways of talking about invisible disabilities. And Alexis, I really liked the way that by covering up these structures, it became harder to label. And I really liked that resistance of the label and that you're removing them from the context that defines them even more. And so I really identified a lot with how you were proposing that. And I liked the starkness of the blue contrast with the white when you put all of the images together. I really appreciated that. But my question to both of you would be, how has making this art helped you in reclaiming your personal narratives? That's the end of my current thought.
Are there any other questions or comments? Hearing none, if you'd like to respond to or have a final word, anyone on the panel, we have about 3 or 4 more minutes, so. You have more time? Do you think that's time?
Yeah, this is important.
Okay.
Somebody who had written that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
I don't know if they make any sense. Okay.
The question I'm sort of remembering the most, the gentleman in the back, and he said you were curious to see how other girls with scoliosis or other men with scoliosis identified with my project, or how my parents saw it, because more than sort of the hospital world and the school world, my family was the most important to me and the most supportive during all of this. It's funny, I think my parents don't really understand these forms. They've been very supportive of my art career in the beginning, but they still always say probably the same thing that most parents of artists say to their children, which is, you should just, draw pictures of lighthouses, and people love that. But at the same time, but I think it gives them a window into it, because the sort of unique scenario around my case of scoliosis is that scoliosis is, in most scenarios, genetic, and so my grandmother has it, my mom has it, my aunt, one of my sister's family has it, but it's not always. It just so happened that it's on both sides of my family. It's not just one, which is all it really needs to be. So both my grandmothers have it, and I have aunts on both sides. My uncle even married a woman who has scoliosis, so it's all over my family. And so I feel very, very subconscious when I'm making artwork about scoliosis, because I'm very acutely aware that it isn't just for me. It is for my family and for young girls. But I haven't had an opportunity yet to talk directly with people outside of my family who have scoliosis. So something I'm looking forward to is this January, early January, with I Love a Gallery in Halifax, and we'll be working in collaboration with Curvy Girls, which is a young support group in Halifax. They have branches all over Canada and the US. But it's called Curvy Girls, and it's a group for young girls 19 and under who have been diagnosed or who are the siblings of or friends of people who have been diagnosed with scoliosis. And so I'm going to be trying to create a project or talk, maybe work with this existing project in a larger group setting with people who are directly impacted by scoliosis. So maybe in January I'll have a clearer idea of how to answer that question beyond the realm of just my family.
Salima? Yeah, sorry, I was just absorbing that for a second. Cecilia, in response to your question, no one pushed back. Oddly enough, people were strangely comfortable with me, like peering into and recording their brains. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Pushing back. I don't know why I even bothered to take notes. So removing from context. Okay, so I think that was something really interesting of thinking about resisting the label and the stigma. I think a huge thing for me was looking past the pity gaze that I often get when I tell people I have MS. I don't know if you can tell, but I don't feel particularly heavy about it right now, which isn't always the case, but I think that this process of reclaiming narratives is really important, because one of the ways that MS affected me is that I'm losing my memory pretty bad and cognitive abilities, and I used to depend a lot on them. It used to be my way of functioning in the world. And my new normal is more present. It's now, and it's relational. It's connecting with people, and I think that the validation of that new normal feels good, especially when people are comfortable with with letting me access their like incredibly vulnerable data and their stories and things like that. I think that if anything, the whole experience validated that that it's okay that I'm losing things because I'm just kind of gaining strength in another part of my life and my skills and abilities. Also because I was told in the process of trying to find funding to make the project multisensory that my art doesn't belong in art. It belongs somewhere, but it's not art. And so I was someone that meant it out of love. He was just giving me honest feedback. He's like, because I don't have that language. I don't, listening to a lot of people that actually studied art and things like that, I don't have that. So it, even through that acknowledgement through the Council of the Arts and Tangled and things like that, that kind of external validation helped to also like find my own power and ability to be open, because I think that the more open that I can be and the more vulnerable that I can be, the more comfortable people are in opening and sharing, and I find that that's really therapeutic for myself, and also moving forward, I'm studying social work and I'm seeing how that's helpful in counseling as well. I know I missed a bunch of questions, but I'm better at one-on-one anyway, so if you feel like asking them, feel free to ask them later.
So I just want to take a deep breath and take all of that in. So maybe we can all sort of do that together. One of the things that I think at the beginning I said something about how disability studies, disability activism, disability justice, disability artists, that there's this notion of access as this thing that we make and do together. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is that artists give us these tools to think about relating differently and to be in spaces and time together differently. Carrie started us off with some of those questions yesterday. And I just really appreciated and noted and will continue to percolate and value the way the two of you, in very different ways, would sort of model what it means to care for others in the making of art. And you both talked about visibility, right? And thinking about, we talk about some disabilities as being invisible. But one of the things I think that's interesting to me is that a lot of disabilities become more apparent to people who are trained or have experience in being in crip community. And so thinking about that also as a skill and a practice and a way of relation, to sort of think about making things that outside of crip communities.
It's the ghost of MB94, everyone.
Surprise performance.
Someone just said it's a flash mob. Yeah, just kidding. I said it was a ghost of MB94.
Yeah, but I did not.
Neither is this one. Okay, is it? No.
Wow. So if you want to just continue.
Forcing us to breathe.
You want to give another shot there?
What? Want to try again?
Is this working now?
Keep speaking, sir.
Now?
Just want to see if I'm receiving level. So if you continue speaking, I just.
Oh, if I keep talking? Okay. So I'm just going to continue to make some noise with the mic. Registers.
Okay, I apologize. If you'd like to, you continue speaking, but I'll try to resolve.
Well, I think the mic might be an access issue for folks.
I agree.
Yeah.
So we're not sure we can get the mic working in the next few minutes. And for those of you who might have come in late, you missed the announcement that Véro was not able to join us today. But Salima had a suggestion that maybe we should stop a little bit early so that folks can go witness the exhibit and the work that Véro did. And so we're not stopping early, but this is a good reminder, I think, of other presences who aren't present. So let's go look at an experience and witness art, perhaps.
And again, thank you, everybody, and to Alison, and to Salima, and to Alexis for your fantastic presentations. And to Carla for helping us keep on time.
Just a quick clarification, though, we do have another panel happening in this room. At around 11:50, we'll say at 11:50, and then after that, we'll move to the fourth space for lunch. 11:50.